Operation Pike was the code name for a strategic bombing plan against the Soviet Union by the Royal Air Force. British military planning against the Soviet Union occurred during the first 2 years of the Second World War, when, despite Soviet neutrality, the British and French came to the conclusion that the German-Soviet pact made Moscow an ally of Hitler. The plan was designed to destroy the Soviet oil industry, to cause the collapse of the Soviet economy and deprive Germany of Soviet resources. After the conclusion of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Britain and France became deeply concerned that Stalin kept supplying more oil to Hitler's Germany. Planning began shortly after the Soviet invasion of Poland in September of 1939 and gained momentum after Joseph Stalin launched the Winter War against Finland in November of 1939. Planners identified the dependence of Germany on oil imports from the Soviet Union as a vulnerability that could be exploited. According to a report submitted to the French Prime Minister in February of 1940, an oil shortage would cripple the Red Army and Soviet Air Force, as well as Soviet collective farm machinery, causing possible widespread famine and even the collapse of the Soviet Union. Dependence on oil supplies from the Caucasus is the fundamental weakness of the Soviet economy. The armed forces and the motorized agriculture were totally dependent on this source. More than 90% of oil extraction and 80% of refinement was located in the Caucasus, primarily in Baku. Therefore, interruption of oil supplies of any large scale would have far-reaching consequences and could even result in the collapse of all the military, industrial, and agricultural systems in the country. Serious preparation by the British began after the end of the Winter War, when Finland in March of 1940. By April, plans to attack oil production centers in the Caucasus towns of Baku and Grozny were complete. Bombers were to be flown from bases in Iran, Turkey, and Syria in the raid, codenamed Operation Pike. In March of 1940, the British undertook secret reconnaissance flights to photograph areas deep inside the Soviet Union, utilizing high-altitude, high-speed photography. Using specially modified and unmarked Lockheed Super Electra aircraft painted in a special blue camouflage scheme, the Secret Intelligence Service launched the high-altitude reconnaissance flights from the Royal Air Force Habania, a Royal Air Force station in Iraq. Flying over the mountainous region of southeastern Kurdistan in Iranian airspace, across the coast of the Caspian Sea, then north towards Baku. Loitering for an hour whilst making 6 photographic runs, the aircraft left Baku and returned to its base. Another reconnaissance sortie was flown in April, this time crossing Turkish airspace to reach Batumi. These flights encountered Soviet anti-aircraft fire, and a Soviet fighter even attempted an interception. The British had obtained everything they needed for photo interpretation purposes and for mapping the Soviet petroleum centers. Analysis of the photography revealed that the oil infrastructure in Baku and Batumi were particularly vulnerable to air attacks, as both could be approached from the sea, so the more difficult target of Grozny would be bombed first to exploit the element of surprise. Oil fields were to be attacked with incendiary bombs, while tests conducted that light oil storage tanks at the oil processing plants could be detonated with high explosives. As the 1st of April 1940, 4 squadrons comprising approximately 48 Bristol Blenheim bombers were transferred to the Middle East Command, supplemented with a number of single-engine bombers for nations. A French force of 65 Martin Maryland bombers and a supplementary force of 24 Farman F-222 heavy bombers were also allocated for night operations during the campaign. The campaign was expected to last 3 months, and over 1,000 tons of ordnance was allocated to the operation. But in reality, Allied bombers would probably have been ineffective in destroying the fields, as in 1940 British night bombing raids against Germany were so inaccurate that few bombs managed to be dropped within miles of their target. A disadvantage that remained for the whole war. With around 100 bombers, each capable of carrying only half a ton of bombs, low payload and pure accuracy made it extremely unlikely that they would have any significant effect on Soviet oil facilities. Allied intelligence also conducted that Soviet oil comprised only a small part of Germany's fuel, the bulk of which actually came from Romania. But the German blitzkrieg and the swift fall of France in May of 1940 derailed the plans. The Germans captured a train that contained boxes of secret documents evacuated from Paris. Amongst these were documents dealing with Operation Pike. On the 4th of July 1940, in a propaganda campaign to justify the invasion of France, the Deutsches Nachrichtenbüro, or the German News Bureau, released excerpts of the captured documents relating to Operation Pike, asserting that Germany must be credited with saving other states, including the Soviet Union, from being drawn into this chaos by the Allies. End quote. Compromising the conspiracy and the strategic Anglo-French bombing campaign against Soviet targets was postponed and eventually abandoned. It is interesting to note that after the attack on the Soviet Union by Germany in June of 1941, Operation Pike was revived as a contingency plan to be invoked in the event that German forces occupied the Caucasian oil fields. Although the British and French pursued the operation to weaken Germany and Soviet Russia, the actual outcome would likely have been more detrimental for the planners. Strategically, if the attack had been launched prior to the invasion of France, Britain would have faced the prospect of fighting a German-Soviet alliance alone after France's fall, which also would have put off the almost inevitable German-Soviet war. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you subscribe to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.